have any, doesn't look like we have any new attendees today, but if there are, let me know. Today's agenda, we don't not have any new things to review today in terms of things to approve. This is kind of more of an
Sorry,
update.
Steve, sorry to interrupt, but do you mind posting the notes in the chat so we can, the agenda so we can follow along and help with the notes?
Oh, yeah, I'm sharing my screen, but I can post it in the chat as well.
Thanks.
There you go. There you go.
Thanks.
I have been just an update. I've been trying to find an alternative or backup secretary for this group for quite a while now, and have been unable to do so. So if anyone from your member organizations would like to, if you know anybody that might want to step up and participate for, in an international standards organization in terms of being able to take notes and that sort of thing, that would be immensely useful. Thank you. Wanted to kind of review the backlog in terms of what is currently going on right now. The two major features of CycloneDX 1.6 are complete at this point, and we are currently working on just relatively minor things at this point. Let me just try to pull up the backlog of what's still kind of in flight. And the backlog for that, I'll post that in the chat window as well. Let's so this is the current backlog of what's kind of in scope for 1.6. We have some minor documentation issues. In fact, everything here, there's a lot of documentation clarifications that we need to make. There is a few defects in the 1.5 spec that we are addressing, but there's really no major features. Now, some of these things we're going to kick back to 1.7. We just don't have enough time to do them. The support for evidence for services, for example, that's being moved out to 1.7. Evidence for vulnerabilities, that's also going to be moved out to 1.7. These are major new features that we just did not have the time to do for this particular release. Everything else, again, mostly it's minor documentation stuff that's fairly simple to correct. So that's really all for the backlog. We should be this 63% complete. This should be close to 90% complete by this time, the next time we meet. So it's going to be fairly much all done at that point. We also have let me just for the CBOM, and I'll post this in the chat as well. For the CBOM and for the attestations, again, those are the two major new features. We also have guides in place to do this. Both of these guides are also around 90-95% complete at this point. So both of the working groups have been working really hard to get these released, and they will be released when we launch 1.6. Daniel?
So it's great to see this progress towards the end of 1.6. However, we still haven't really reviewed what all the other things are. I don't even know if it makes sense to talk about these details before we have, as a committee, reviewed what the CycloneDX specification is and what we're standardizing overall.
Yeah. So that's kind of the next thing on my agenda here.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. And I completely agree with you. It's going to be a lot to review. I'm currently generating the documentation. It's around 900 pages or so. So it's, again, it's a fairly lengthy specification. I'm trying to cut that down to something a little bit more manageable, between 500 and 600 pages. But that's kind of currently where we're at. Um,
Can you say like what you're generating and how?
yeah, we have some custom, again, the JSON schema is our source of truth from an implementation and from a documentation perspective. And we are generating a PDF that is right now it's around 900 pages, human readable. And it has some formatting issues that I'm dealing with. And some of those formatting issues are kind of lending themselves to making the document much more verbose than it needs to be. So I'll be working on that over the next couple of days. And once that is done, that should cut that down to around 500-600 pages, which will be a little bit more in line to
Yeah.
what most specs are.
So I was taking a look at the JSON schema, and if is the specification going to incorporate any text beyond what's in that? Because, for example, we might include an introduction to describe what everything is for, or we might include algorithms that can be defined against the SBOM format, which the software tends to implement compatibly. Do you
Mhm.
think we will include those kinds of things in the
Absolutely. That's why some of these guides are kind of important for us to get them done.
Oh,
We've got,
okay.
yeah, so a lot of the text from the guides will also kind of make their way into the ECMA document. So that's why I was presenting the guide. So we've got the authoritative guide to SBOM, which is already published. It was published last year. This has been viewed by many as really one of the best documents that have ever been produced on SBOM. A lot of this content will make its way into the ECMA standard document as well. Same thing for the attestations and the CBOM, because like the CBOM, for example, this has really good explanations on what the use cases are, why you would even want to do this in the first place, which should obviously go into the ECMA document as well.
Yeah, I was reading that authoritative guide to SBOM, and it seemed really good, but it would be nice if you could also provide cross references between that and then the particular JSON schema fields, because the guide
Mhm.
was like a little bit high level, and it would be good if that could also include some slightly more precise algorithms for how to interpret the the fields, and like what to do with them, like how they fit into various different flows of producing or consuming SBOMs. I think those are those are just that there's a gap in understanding between the two things, where you would probably have to currently read and understand a bunch of software to be able to reconstruct how things work. Does that seem like a
Okay.
reasonable goal? Maybe that's kind of asking for too much in the spec that's unrealistic.
Possibly. It would be great to be able to capture an example of that and possibly compare that to what we're going to be what we plan to kind of produce in terms of documentation.
Okay. Yeah, that's a
So yeah. So get with me offline, and I'd really like to understand more of the details of if you have any examples kind of in mind, and see where the gaps are.
okay, great. We'll be in touch.
Alyssa?
And in the chat, just about a schedule, are we still planning to release date in April for 1.6?
Yeah. So there'll be an OWASP release in April. Realistically, will be done by the end of March. So yeah. And then we're trying to get all the text done for this group by the end of this month, because we have timing constraints if we're going to get a mid-year ECMA release of 1.6 as well. So that's why we're trying to get as much focus on documentation as humanly possible.
Yeah, I want to mention it. I think it's great to work towards the goal of releasing this as a standard mid-year, but if we end up not making that deadline and OWASP publishes 1.6 mid-year and Ecma publishes it at the end of the year, I'm not sure how big of a cost that would be. If that will be a big problem for this group, I'm kind of curious to understand that. Like even if our main goal is to meet that deadline, if we're kind of at a point ever of feeling like we're being rushed, how serious of a problem that is.
Yeah, I think the ECMA schedule of only twice a year is a little challenging. We typically release, usually in Q1, Q2, and having everything prepared by like February or prepared by, if we were going to do like an end of year thing, it's that twice a year cadence is not overly flexible. So it would be really great if we could work toward a model where we could do in between each of the big GA meetings. It'd be great if there was also a process that we could leverage to be able to release between those cadences as well. Because waiting another 6 months is,
That's really good feedback. We'll take that and consider it among the Ecma management. Sorry, Samina.
I'm sorry, I couldn't raise my hand. Steve, I just want to say you can do something outside of the June and December. We can do it through a ballot and an online ballot. So let's discuss this. So if you find that you need more time to make sure that you have all documents reviewed by everybody before you take the next step, we can find an opportunity where the standard doesn't have to wait till December. And I can elaborate on that later when we have our own meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Very good. All right. That's actually really good to know. Because we have, while the core team has been kind of rushed. In terms of releasing 1.6, an OWASP version of 1.6, and then later, like toward the end of the year, an Ecma version of 1.6, I actually don't see that as really an issue at all. 1.7 development is actually going to start like next week. So, we're continuing to move. I really don't see that as really an issue. One thing, and I know Philip is not here today, but one thing that I did want to kind of just inform everyone is that based on the last meeting's vote of adopting Perl, I've added Perl to the TC54 website. So if you go to tc54.org, go to specifications, it's now on the drop down. Obviously, there's still a lot to figure out with Perl. I think we need to figure out like what are the next steps for Perl and VERS. Are they two separate things that we, as TC54, that we want to approach? Do we want to combine them together? And then finally, what are we going to do with Perl types? I kind of see this as more of a registry, which I do not believe Ecma currently does. So I wanted to kind of discuss these 2 points if possible.
On the last point with Perl types, it seems like that needs to be in scope to me. And the reason being is it may not have meaning for parsing tools like, some of the language specific libraries they could put out that are just kind of go to the spec, but not down to the tool level. But the semantics there are really important for anyone consuming the Perls, and it would be breaking to tools that use them if that changes without, some good control around it. So to me, it seems like that ought to be in the specs for each of the types should be in scope. And perhaps we can have something like a, draft for people who are working on them so that people know it hasn't been adopted fully yet, but it doesn't stop you from utilizing that, just understanding that it's not completely locked down yet.
Keith, could you say a little more about the practical side of this, how Perl is maintained today, and how or whether the stability issues present themselves with its current, GitHub based model?
I've not personally ran into that. It's been, I think, a fairly small group that works on it, and there hasn't been very much changes once a type spec has been released. Haven't really seen the semantics of that change. There is varying levels of thoroughness that are put into the individual type specs. And so some of them have a little bit more ambiguity than others. And I think that lends itself to perhaps having subtle changes as well. But it's not necessarily been a problem that I've personally encountered. I could just foresee that being an issue if those were to change without proper communication and versioning of the spec.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of see it as a more of like a. I agree. I kind of see it in my view as almost like an Ecma version equivalent of maybe like Aaron, who publishes like things like media types and URNs, for example. I mean, there's a template essentially that every media type, every URN, etc., kind of follows. And I think if we had like some kind of registry in place and the templates necessary to maintain consistency across all the Perl types so that we don't come into situations where one is a little bit more descriptive than the next one, for example, I think that would dramatically increase the quality and ultimately help the community of adopters using it.
I mean, those registers you just mentioned are basically static. They get written down because they were in place already and were well tested. Regarding Perl types, let's go with, for example, the PyPI thing, which is the the Perl for Python packages, and it assumes a default value for package registry or repository URL, and yeah, it's repository URL, which basically means the package registry, and it assumes a default value, which is pypi.org, which is okay because that's the main purpose of the package, but let's just theoretically say that changes in the future because something stupid happens, and they need to have another default value, then they usually they can't just simply change it without knowledge. They need to print the spec or to make it visible somehow.
Yeah.
But as far as I mean, I've implemented the Perl spec myself, so I know most of the details about in most areas, let's say that. And for most cases, it's possible to have non-breaking changes reflecting real-world changes. Like I said, yeah, the default value could change. Well, who cares? Just set it explicitly instead of having a default value and you're good to go. This is all possible. So I think we could actually, I haven't talked to Philip yet, but my gut's feeling is the types could be registered and be standardized in the usual way, like we were just talked about.
And if we were to then version the types, if we were to version the type definitions, for example, independent of the Perl spec, I think that would solve that would solve a lot of challenges, I think, which is something we don't do today.
With the prefix, the PKG prefix, and then have a PKG2, which means Perl spec version 2 and stuff like that. Maybe.
No, yeah, I'm just talking about like, we'll standardize the Perl spec. So that's just a syntax of Perl. But for the Perl types, what I'm saying is that part of the registry, if this is something that we do, we can version each of the Perl types independently. Because right now it's basically just a single markdown document, and we just kind of append to it like a Google Doc, which is probably not the right way to manage these things going forward.
Yeah, I mean, this is a process that people need to come up with. But yeah, I think you're right. Let's split those. Let's have the spec standardized, the verse spec, in case there's a different spec, have it standardized, and then the other thing, the registry could be live on its own.
Where would the Perl type registry be hosted? Question from Dennis. That's a great question. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
I don't think Ecma does registries today.
Yeah, there's no inherent reason why Ecma couldn't form a process for registries. It's just not something that we've received as a request from the TC before. So I think we could host it. For that, the main question I have is, what's the sort of speed of response time that we need from, a new package manager comes in, or one of these changes is made to an existing entry, to publishing a new version of the registry. Presumably, every 6 months is kind of too slow for that, but don't have a good understanding of exactly how quick the response time needs to be. So any thoughts there would be useful.
Well, a question, would a GitHub public site specifically, public project specifically for registering Perl types be adequate to be a registry?
Well,
I think
I
it
guess
might, but
that's what we have already. I mean,
Well, no, we don't. We basically have a single repository that has Perl, vers, and a single document that has all the Perl types. It's kind of like a running.
it's a document, yeah. And it's possible that we need to get a bit more formal about, okay, this is the list for version whatever, 1.0. And when we add a new one or modify descriptions of one, we have a new version. And that would be, I think, maybe what I hear Steve, you and the others saying, that should be independent of this Perl spec itself, which is fairly stable. So, but we expect
Yeah.
Perl types to grow and multiply and continue and get refined. So
That is correct. Perl is already at version 1. So version 1 was released a long while ago. But as you said, Perl types continue on evolving. Vers is almost at the 1.0 stage at this point. I'm kind of on the fence. Should these be two separate specifications? One actually does have a dependency on the other, but they're two different things. I don't know if that's something we want to bundle together or if it's something that we want to separate. I don't have a strong enough opinion either way. But it's something I think we need to talk through. From an Ecma perspective, future work on Perl, would this require a task group going forward, or should we continue to do that within this group?
Steve, this is Samina. That's very much up to the committee. I mean, we can do a task group, and that won't be a problem. It's a task group under TC54 where Perl is worked on. Both are possible. It's up to the committee.
Okay. Well, I'll throw it out there. We don't have to decide today.
I want to bring up about Perl versioning. I guess the simplest possible thing would be to put like release tags with version numbers in the current GitHub repository. That wouldn't necessarily involve anything with Ecma. Kind of curious about the pros and cons with that, but I guess, sorry.
We'd have to break up the document. We'd have to break up the Perl types document and version each one independently. Unfortunately, GitHub itself is kind of inflexible in a lot of ways. You can have, releases, but when you release on GitHub, it's really kind of a snapshot of the entire repo. It's not necessarily possible to release a specific file within a repo, so to speak. I mean, you can there's workarounds around that. It's just not an ideal platform for a registry, but yeah. But in terms of just having that as an intake for a registry, so that maybe this, you know, twice a year thing doesn't become too much of an issue. You know, having it as an intake to a registry might be good.
Yeah, I would want to avoid a situation where there's like the ECMA published one and then the real one that's maintained informally.
Yeah.
Sorry, I guess we're at time. Should we make
Yeah.
these meetings an hour long? We always seem to kind of run out of time to get into these issues.
Well, we've got one more meeting, I think, for February, I believe, and the plan was to make these an hour or more, but have them you know, like short, not every 2 weeks. They're going to be like once a month or so.
Steve, maybe you want to consider the longer meeting in the first 2 weeks, once every other week, as we're doing now with the cadence, because there is quite a bit to discuss and understand, and it may help. Maybe you start the first 2 meetings in that same mode if it's agreeable to everybody.
Of March, sure. So 1 hour, same cadence.
Works
Yes.
for me.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
But start
that
at the same
scheduled.
time, right? Just make it longer at the end.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, and I think we all forgot to record this time. Sorry about that.
No,
But-
I announced it. It's recorded. It's
Oh,
recording.
sorry. I see record button still, so sorry about that.
That's-
So yeah, see you all in a couple weeks.
All right.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Right.